Eric Schmidt. Eric was backstage, so he didn't see the Jeff Immelt video and what he has to live up to tonight. Google has an energy plan, a national energy. The nation may not have a national energy plan, but Google has a national energy plan. I have seen you in the last 4 months on Meet the Press, Larry King, the Neil Cavuto show, the Rachel Maddow show. I mean, the only person I have seen on the tube more than you in the last 4 months is Boone Pickens. Why are you doing it?
Because energy matters. If you go back to the survey that you showed at the beginning, people say the environment doesn't matter, but the energy matters a lot to them. And the way you solve the environment problem is you solve the energy problem. From a Google perspective, it's the right thing to do for the world. It's also good for our business because we're in the information business. And a lot of the energy solutions involve a lot of information.
But that would have to be a pretty small part of your overall business, energy information.
But we're happy to make money everywhere.
You know, I always thought the way Google worked was that Larry and Sergey were the guys out doing no evil and you were back home running the company.
Yes, that's all true.
Has that started to change?
You mean, are you implying that they're beginning to do evil? No.
No. No, I'm implying that you're out in I want to talk about the details. I'm going to talk about the details of your energy plan, but I think it's interesting to have you.
We're in a situation where people, and there are many people in this room, you've got to get out and take a stand. So we talked about it, and Larry and I talk about it a lot, and Larry and I have been interested in this for a very long time. We need to take a stand. We'll put up a proposal, and you can shoot at us, but at least we put up a proposal, and at least you can judge us based on what we said. Yeah. And I think the more of that, the better. You've got a number of authors of such proposals here at the conference, and I think that's great.
So you gave one of the early speeches you gave on this was in September. I pulled something up off the web where people were commenting on it. A shareholder says, I don't want Eric Schmidt out there talking about green energy investments. I understand they consume a lot of energy, but that doesn't address the top line. It has a marginal effects on earnings. Don't do it. I mean, what do you say to shareholders who say this isn't the way you should be spending your time?
Well, the shareholder value in a company is created at the end of everything you do. You create shareholder value by serving your customers, building a great business, and if you do a great job, your stock will go up. So they're not first in the discussion point. What's really first at Google is about changing the world, right, in a positive way. Can we make a difference? In our case, we're huge energy users. So a relatively straightforward solution to our energy costs goes right to the bottom line. Sorry.
All right.
Okay. Is that a crisp enough answer, or shall I make a stronger answer?
No, that was good. That was good.
Lower costs cause more earnings for shareholders.
If you had seen the Jeff Immelt video, you would have thrown in a few expletives, but that
green energy done right is more profitable than the old kind of energy. Okay? It's really easy to understand.
So let's talk about
So this is a good business to be in, which is why we're all here.
It's important for Google.
Right. It's called ECO.
That's right. So let's talk about the specifics of the plan. You set a target date of 2030.
That's correct.
To get utilities totally off of carbon fuels.
It's easier if I sort of make the argument this way. You've got to solve a whole bunch of problems. And in the environmental movement, you'll get people who are ideologues on one issue in favor or against. Our view is that all of the aspects are going to be brought in some way. You've got to solve the energy generation problem, and you've got to solve the transportation problem. So surprisingly, when you add it all up, if you make, in our view, the right assumptions and you invest in the right ways, you end up saving money. And that's the thing that I think was most surprising to me. So the rough numbers are, we need about $3.5 trillion of investment over 22 years as opposed to over 3 months, which is a separate discussion. It's over 22 years. And we generate, on a cost basis, a savings of $4.4 trillion. So this is a net investment value, if you will, by rebuilding the energy infrastructure of about $800 billion, which in present value terms is about $200 billion, and we certainly need the money. So the fact of the matter is that if you invest in the right way, you can make money by doing this. And the way you do it, right, is you've got to figure out a way to install the renewable energy and the distribution network to get it to consumers, and you've got to address the energy efficiency issues with respect to cars.
Okay, so let's start with the renewable energy, the utility piece of it. Your 2030 plan takes renewables to like a third of our...
That's correct.
up from, I don't know, what is it now, 1%, 2%?
What we did is we kept the current sources of power roughly constant, because we figured they're not going to be turned off. In particular, we kept nuclear at its current absolute number.
You don't want more nuclear in your plan?
Our plan does not require more nuclear, and it also does not require to turn it off, which is important. And again, we'll talk about nuclear in a sec. But the important thing is that if you build those plants, the incremental cost is high because you have to build all these plants. But also, you don't have to build other plants. So part of the calculation is, what do you not have to build? And the other assumption we made is that you would enact essentially a renewable portfolio standard and constant energy efficiency, which has been achieved on a per capita basis, which has been achieved in California since 1973. If you look at per capita use of energy in the United States, it has gone up over 30 years, largely due to regulatory issues in our view. And if you decouple the management of electric utilities, literally if you compensate the electric utilities for efficiency as opposed to absolute profits,
which happens in California.
Done in California and now done in 8 to 10 other states, depending on how you define it, and I think will become a national trend because it's obviously a more efficient model, you end up with a significant savings there.
That's the energy efficiency.
That's the energy one.
So you get a big piece from energy efficiency. But
and then on the car side, there are many, and Amory has talked about this in much of his writings.
But stay with utilities just for a second. Sure. I don't want to leave utilities yet, because it's really the notion that we can, between now and 2030, go from, again, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's like well under 1% wind power to, wind power is a huge percentage.
It's about 10%.
10% of your plan. And solar, so again, wind, from very small percentages.
I should say, by the way, that wind is, on a kilowatt per hour basis, roughly similar to the cost of coal after the subsidies it gets today. And without the subsidies, it's a couple cents higher per kilowatt. So that's pretty good. And it's the one that's closest now to being a free substitute for coal, which is the most common power source that we all have. The issue, of course, is the wind doesn't blow in the places where the people are. So in order to make these systems really work, you also have to have the grid technology. And the problem with the grid is it takes 2 years to get the line built and 8 years to get the permits. So, I mean, I'm not making that up, by the way. So you fundamentally have to establish either federal rights of way for these things, or other incentives that cause the utilities and so forth to actually be able to build these powerful.
So the federal government has to say, we can site these transmission lines where we need to.
And
that
has been discussed. The Obama administration has already indicated very strong support for a federal renewable portfolio standard. An alternative, if that does not get through, and I suspect it will get through, is that you can imagine incentives at the state level where if 2 states have RPSs, they can basically build these lines quicker with federal help. So the arguments that we make do not work unless you solve the problem that the wind blows in the middle part of the country from the north to south, and by the way, there's a tremendous amount of wind, and the sun shines primarily in the deserts and heats up the ground for enhanced geothermal.
That's critical. You have to do that.
Absolutely critical. If you look at the rate of improvement of solar photovoltaic and also solar thermal, they are behind wind, but they're going to get there. It's remarkable how quickly they're moving.
And do you see a distributed plan? Are you talking about me putting solar panels on my house, or are you talking about centralized solar power generating facilities?
All solutions ultimately are distributed. One of the errors that we have is we have a patchwork of economics and incentives that distort what is an obviously correct model, which is distributed power. And you want it to be able, that people on a fair basis to be able to generate and send power back into the grid and on an economically equivalent basis. Many of the utilities are now being regulated so that they have tariffs in. And then, in fact, it's becoming possible to have a real business of generating power and sending it into the utilities.
And why not clean coal? Why not carbon capture? Why not take advantage of the technologies that can make coal plants?
Well, first, there's a lot of great progress in carbon capture and sequestration. I don't use the term clean coal because I think it's misused. I think it's used.
Because you don't think coal is clean?
Well, if we're going to talk about coal, I'd like to talk about it in the context of its CO2 load, as opposed to the other particulates that clean coal typically represents. So the fundamental problem is coal, which is the most prevalent source of energy in the United States and China, generates too much CO2. It really does contribute to global warming. Now, one answer to that is that you have a carbon tax or a cap and trade system. I am skeptical as to whether those are going to happen simply because they have the wrong words in them, which have the words taxes and prices and so forth. There are many, many people who believe that they're the right answer, but I think just politically, we have to act as though those will occur, but not anytime soon. So what that tells you is in our case, we assume carbon capture and sequestration will work, but we assume that it will take a fairly long time for those systems to become prevalent enough. I should say that we're having a US-based conversation here, but we can solve all the problems in the United States and get them right, and we can still die, right, as a society, basically because of the issues in China and India. And so in the car conversation that was fascinating earlier, one of the things to emphasize is we have to solve the efficient car problem in the United States, but it's even more important to establish it at lower price points in developing countries, which is where most of the cars are going to get sold. Now, maybe you start in the US and then you learn from that and you scale from there. These need to be global solutions.
And then why did you choose the Google plan to be a national plan?
Because we could get accurate numbers. One of the other problems about energy is that there's not an agreed upon set of facts. It's too new, there are too many maybe too many political operatives or too many business interests, but there's not a common spreadsheet on what are costs, how do the economics work, and maybe there won't be. But it's not a perfectly free market in the sense that you don't really understand what the costs are. And my guess is that without some form of cap and trade or carbon tax, we will never really understand what the cost of these plants should be.
I've seen you say in other venues that you stepped into this gap because you felt there was an enormous lack of leadership in the United States on the energy issues. Do you still feel that?
Well, obviously the administration makes a huge difference, and President Obama, then candidate Obama, had indicated a very strong support for renewable energy. And I think, with politicians, you want to sort of judge them based on what they do, not what they say. The stimulus bill that was passed had $50 billion of renewable investment, renewable credit.
Is it in the right places as far as you're concerned?
It's good enough, right? Given that the government is, 2 months old, they did a good job of getting it.
It doesn't address this transmission problem.
There's about $6 billion of actually smart grid and smart grid investment, and that's probably sufficient. There are probably more policy issues that will come when people start to actually try to build these grids and they discover various other either federal issues or state issues.
But I mean, smart grid seems to mean different things to different people, but what I've heard when I've inquired about what that money is for, I hear more talk about devices in the home to monitor energy usage as opposed to cracking that big problem you said of getting the power from where it can be generated to where it is consumed.
Certainly the policy intent was to do both. It's worth noting, by the way, that we take for granted the structure of the internet and how powerful it is and distributed notion. Anyone can connect to anything and you can monitor everything on the internet. None of that is true of the energy grid to first order. So the most obvious thing that you want is you want to be able to have a computer that somehow talks to your dryer and calculates the optimal time to turn on the dryer. And that optimal time will depend on an awful lot of dynamics. Today's price for energy, today's consumption, is the grid full, those sorts of things. If you look at energy cost, right, literally the cost that the utilities face, which is horrendous in these situations, it's not the base load that costs them all the money, it's the peak power. And it has to do with human use and human cycles of the day. So the power that they have to turn on at 2 to 4 on a summer afternoon is immensely more marginally expensive than the power that they have every day. So anything that you can do that can shift even 5 or 10% off of that has huge systemic benefits for savings and efficiency and obviously climate change and so forth.
Do you think your experience in the computer business then helps you see issues in the energy business that perhaps people who are actually in that business don't see?
Well, it certainly makes us a better irritant of them. We look at the structure and we think, and I mean that with this respect because these are people who have worked hard to build a great system. It's not very flexible. So we like to think of applying computers to a mature system to make it that much more efficient. Again, even 5 or 10% improvements because of marginal cost have these enormous amounts of savings for them. So there's every reason to think that this will happen quite quickly.
So you talk about people with a lot of experience in the business. Since we have Michael Morris here, who runs one of the largest utilities, largely coal-fired utilities in the country, I wonder can we get a microphone up here, please? And I wonder if we could hear your reaction to the Google plan. It's coming.
Alan, thank you. And Eric, thanks for all the kind words you said. We obviously agree with much of what you've had to say and take challenge with some of the timelines and some of the dates. I feel like Alan Mulally, we're going to get there, but the internal combustion engine, which we call a baseload power plant, is going to be with us a long time.
Yeah, sure.
But we will transition to these things over time. Clearly, I agree with your point that we'll get to distributed generation. It would be foolhardy for us to sit back, as telcos did some years ago, and say, oh yeah, sure, people are going to walk around with telephones in their pocket, because they do. And eventually, you and I may have a power plant in our home, a small power plant, driven by some other fuel source. It may be the sun, it may be the wind, it may be any of those combinations, but it'll take all of those things. I admire your comment about the transmission grid. You know, one of the things that my long-term colleague Boone Pickens has done for all of America is to raise the awareness of the need for the grid to be built. The end game for Boone, and it was pretty clear when he was asking Alan, is to put compressed natural gas to better work than the generation of power. And what we see about the grid is get that federal authority to get it built like we do natural gas pipelines, oil pipelines, and those kinds of things. Like Ford, I try to tell the government, we don't need your money, nor do we want your money, because it typically comes slowly and comes with all kinds of strings attached, as some of our colleagues are finding out. What we need is that federal authority to get a single site, and then a cost allocation model. Because sitting around and trying to battle whether the state of X ought to pay this or the state of Y ought to pay that is just confusing. We've looked at your 30% in the timeline you spoke to. Don't know how that can happen. We're 40,000 megawatts.
How do you get 30% of your energy from renewable sources by 2030?
I don't know how we could. We're a 40,000 megawatt generator. That's 12,000 megawatts of wind and sun. You can't do any water anywhere in the United States. So I don't know how we get there. But we're 1,000 plus megawatts of wind today. We're 66% coal today. 2 short years ago, we were 73% coal. So maybe you can get there. I just don't know how the supply chain helps us get there. Well, we're pushing solar thermal. We don't know that it applies in our marketplace. Well, and I'm on that slide you were on earlier, Alan, what you all showed. You know, my average customer pays about $78 a month. Now, we don't serve California, where you pay $708 a month. Or something like that. No kidding. I'm sorry, Peter. I know we'll be on a panel tomorrow together. I'm sure you'll beat me up for that, but so be it. But the fact of the matter is, for an investment of $7,000 or $8,000 or $9,000 for a rooftop solar, to take their cost from $70 to $62 a month, well, I don't know how they're ever going to get there.
Again, we think the number is foot. I think the important point here is that we can't. America is a great country because of our ability to solve problems in clever new ways, really build enormous new businesses that change the world. If you take a look at any of the things, where industries represented here in the room, we can do this and we can do it at scale, especially if we put our heads to it. Much of the energy industry has largely languished in the last 30 years. The universities have not spent that much money on it. As you pointed out, the government regulation has been a disaster for all the reasons that you said, and I think there's an opportunity before us. The other comment I want to make is we have not tonight spoken about efficiency, and by efficiency I mean the efficiency of building insulation, those sorts of things. The quickest way to actually solve all of these problems is to have better passive insulation in your home, those sorts of things. Because saving, so-called negawatts, saving the use of energy is the cheapest form of generating it. And there are tremendous numbers of ideas in there. And if the right financial incentives, we can make that happen even quicker.
Would you just, I'm going to open it up here, but would you comment on that as well, about the California-style incentive system so that you are not incentivized to increase energy usage, basically?
This may take longer than you want.
You've got 20 seconds.
There you go. Can't be done. Anything else? The energy efficiency, there's no question about that. But when you speak to that issue again, think of the Appalachian region of West Virginia, that we serve. There's no one who's going to go out and spend $1,800 to put in new insulation in their home for the purpose of saving $2 a month on the cost of electricity. It's just, there's not an equation that makes sense. To retrofit, and I did the Business Roundtable study with a lot of my colleagues, and many of your people were on the same work with us. There is savings on the 30% range in the commercial marketplace, but that's retrofitting buildings that were built in the 20s and 30s and 40s. It's not going to happen. You're not going to re-window them, HVAC them, insulate them. I don't see that process. Anything new ought to be built that way. You look at the state of Florida, to build a new house, it has to be hurricane-proof. So going to those standards, I think we can get there.
On this, we actually disagree. The president's bill actually has about $6 billion in a low-income re-insulation program.
And an excellent way to get that put to work would be to give it to the state utility regulator.
Agreed.
Through us, put it to work.
But I agree with
About
that.
$13 million dedicated to Northeast Ohio 7 years ago in a different administration. Imagine that for insulation for homes. Not one home has been insulated. The $13 million is spent. We got to get a better way to do this.
And by the way, an even better way is to have the utilities be able to capitalize those improvements in their rate base.
Yeah, that's the point. So, and that takes me...
The point is that smart regulation here can actually cause this to occur very quickly. Sure. And things like energy efficiency really do compound over time in terms of the savings.
No argument.
Because energy prices are not going down over the next 20
To your
years.
question, I'm not a decoupler. I'll make my money by the capital investments, and if my gigawatt hours shrink, they shrink.
Okay, thank you. Let's open it up. Somebody else. Oh, Peter. Yes, can we get a microphone back there?
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike's counterpart. I'm at PG&E.
Not a lot of coal there.
Not a lot of coal. Zero in our operation. Let me comment on a couple of points that have been raised. In total agreement that decoupling is the way to go. I've been arguing it for now 4 years in front of the Edison Electric Institute. And you know what I will comment on is during the last year, our stocks lost about 10%, and most of the utilities out there have lost about 50%. And we actually have been a beneficiary of decoupling, which normalizes our revenue and brings us back to a revenue target. The important point to be made there is not only is it good in a downturn, but that it has put in place the right incentives. Mike has an incentive to sell more kilowatt hours every year, every day, every week. And we have been incentivized. The important thing is, California is, call it the 6th largest economy, 7th largest economy in the world. We've had decoupling in place for 30 years. During that period of time, per capita energy use in California has remained flat. Across the rest of the United States, it's gone up 50%. So in a huge laboratory over 30 years, if you have the right incentives in place, energy efficiency will do a tremendous amount.
And Peter, what about renewables? What do you think about Eric's goal of 30% renewables by 2030?
Okay. The first thing I'd say is, you know, whenever, I come from outside the electric utility industry. I was previously at Goldman Sachs. I've been in high tech. Whenever you put an objective out there at first, it seems unaccomplishable. And we felt that way about the 20% goal, 20% by 2010 renewables in California. Well, during the bankruptcy process and energy crisis and all of that, we didn't make much progress. So we came from behind. And we have gotten to the point in 3 or 4 years where we contracted for 24% of our power to come from renewables by 2014. Now, of course, we've recently, in the last 8 months or so, had a meltdown in the capital markets. So what has happened is we're afraid our counterparties aren't going to deliver. So we announced that, first of all, we would do a rooftop photovoltaic program. We had an announcement on that 2 weeks ago. And the next thing we're doing is we're looking to see how we can come into the market and provide financing to distressed counterparties and, in effect, be a venture capitalist or a distressed fund lender. So we're really trying to be creative in getting there. While we may have gotten a setback in getting to 20% by 2010, I believe we will get there no later than, let's say, 2012, 2014. And then what the government of California has said is now we need to do 33%. One would say that is, you know, really far more than we could possibly do. Well, we went to work on it and said, how can we build a business? Not have a mentality of compliance, but how can we build a business and grow our business? And so we have contemplated, visioned, and are working on a long-distance transmission line to British Columbia where they will export wind power as well as hydro to us, clean energy in California. And with that and other programs, we think we can get to 33%. So it really takes the right incentives, and it takes really stretched thinking and visioning to move ahead. And, you know, let's face it, the utility industry has not been known for that historically, and we need to change because people like Google are out there, and they are a catalyst for change as well as government.
Do you want to comment on that?
Thank you. I think it's easy, and I thank you for that. I think people talk about the utilities all the time. The utilities have a number of very important assets, including the ability to raise capital. And they do it often, and they understand it very well. And I think using that capital to achieve these goals against measurable goals is going to be part of the secret.
Question right here. Please identify yourself before.
Carl Pope from the Sierra Club, and a comment and a question to you, not to you.
Me?
At the beginning, yeah, you.
No,
at
I
the
asked
beginning
the
of this
questions.
evening.
I
No,
don't
no,
answer
I'm going
them.
to ask you a question. At the beginning of the evening, we talked about how much things have changed in the last year. And I think in Kitchen Table America, a lot has changed. And I think the conversations that are taking place in Kitchen Table America are a good deal more visionary. And I watched tonight some very, very smart people play gotcha and no, you didn't get me. And I want to say that I think if this was 1943, we wouldn't be having these kinds of conversations. And I think there's at least a possibility that this is 1943. And that we need to be saying, not, well, you really can't do that. You really can't get it done, which is actually the framing of this evening to the business folks up on the table, is you can't really do this. It's too ambitious. The media is setting a table about low expectations, and I don't think America wants that. And I want to ask you, Mr. Murray, how would you be conducting this evening if this was 1943?
What did I do? How would I what?
How would you be conducting this evening differently if it was 1943, and if America really was, as I think a great many Americans think it is, right up against the wall?
Well, we're up against, but it seems to me we're up against two walls, and that's what we're talking about here tonight. We're up against an economic wall. Household budgets are stretched. People are not going to be willing to pay higher prices on their utility bill or pay $5,000 for a hybrid car. And at the same time, we are up against the energy issues that all of you are talking about. So I think what we're trying to do here is to look at some of the trade-offs that are a necessary part of this game.
Well, let me give you a sort of a political answer in context. Change does not occur when things are going well. Change occurs when people are scared. This is the time, and I'm not suggesting my recommendation is correct or the other discussions are, this is the time to have this conversation, set out bold agendas, which is I think what you were trying to get at, and go for it. It's the history of our country that we can do this. How would we think? Are we not capable of doing this? Look at the things that our predecessors were able to do. And we're just as smart, if not smarter. We have the world at our feet in terms of information. Let's do it. We've got the underlying technology. We've got the smartest people in the world. We've got this enormous university system, which in my view has been underutilized and is now getting the right kind of support and funding. Every day I come across some new and interesting idea that's sort of clever. Right? This is the dawn of this sort of new age of ideas. So I would reject the old orthodoxies, and I would suggest that if you get the right people in the room and you drive it really hard, you can beat my plan. You can get it done quicker than 2030 if you all work very hard on it.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Right here. Let's let this gentleman.
I've
We're
got the
going to hear from you.
microphone.
We're going to hear from you. Yeah, I don't know who did that. First rule of moderating is hang on to that
Well,
microphone.
what, do I have to give it up?
Well, you've got a whole hour tomorrow. Go ahead.
No, let
ask
me
your question.
just quickly on a question to Eric. Eric, you're a smart guy, and I love to listen to you talk. But all the things you've said made sense, and everything, the questions have been good. But please tell me how we are going to reduce the dependency on foreign oil, because that is a security issue for this country that I don't think that we can continue like we're going.
And we probably didn't get through the transportation
Yeah, we
issue
didn't talk
as
about
well.
transportation. More efficient cars. And the way you get to more efficient cars is you make them stronger, lighter, better physics. You use better instrumentation within the cars to make them more efficient. All the things that Alan and others are working on. And there's a lot of new stuff coming in that area. More efficient batteries, more efficient powertrains, more efficient use of charging, night charging, all of that. The sum of all of that can produce very significant efficiencies. In fact, in our model, and you can see this in our plan, we actually assume that the economics are such that people will actually want to trade their cars in to get that benefit.
Last question right here.
I'm very inspired by you, Mr. Pope, is it? And you, Eric, and I admire both of you, and you're both exactly right. And we can do this, and we can do this now, and there's the talent in this room to put together a plan that can be implemented. And there's very simple things. One is weatherization. McKinsey, 2008. I beg to differ. But Eric knows, and a lot of people in this room know, weatherization is the low-hanging fruit, like PG&E has discovered. And using tax districting, which has been put in AB 111 in California, we're trying to get this legislation across the country. It will fund the average homeowner to weatherize their home by putting a tax assessment voluntarily on their home. What does that give us? Number one, let's say 5, 10, 15% energy efficient savings. Number two, demand side management. Part of any weatherizing system is demand side management. Another 5 or 10% conservatively, as Eric points out, in reducing reserve requirement for the grid. Now we have 20, 30% excess capacity for the grid. With the cooperation of the utility companies or a little bit of leaning by our president, we get this efficiency, which can then be used for plug-in hybrids, electric cars, and in fact, under the laws that we're putting in, the electric car now has two purposes, because it can additionally, we're designing a home and a demand-side management system so the car plugs into the home, and as Eric pointed out, it additionally reduces demand, the peak demand. So when you combine these things together, they can be implemented now. California, Berkeley, October 2008, their discussion, and just in California, by just weatherizing, it's an $86 billion increase in GDP, a $49 billion savings to the homeowner in California, and 400,000 job creation. So we're solving the economic issue, and we're solving the environmental issue and the energy independence issue. No new technologies, and we can do it now by cooperation between the auto industry, the Googles, the Sierra Clubs, and utility companies, and really the media, because the media can be part of the solution, get this word out. What Eric has been trying to do over and over is say we can innovate, really the same message.
Okay, what we will do now is move upstairs where drinks will be served. I'm sure that will make solving all these problems much easier.
Sure.
And we'll continue the discussion. Tomorrow morning, breakfast starts at 7 o'clock. Program starts at 8:15. Thank you.
Thank you. That was lots of fun.